Welcome into this Adobe Photoshop tutorial, everybody. My name is Nathaniel Dodson. Today we're going to take a look at creating this sort of cool photo being sucked into a smartphone or other device type of photo manipulation, of course, in Photoshop. I got to say I'm inspired, was inspired to create this tutorial. There was a photographer back in 2015 named Anthony Geiger, I believe was his name, who did a series of photos like this, a young kid at the time, and I thought it was cool. The execution was kind of iffy, it was okay, and lately I've seen some artists and photo manipulation type folks on Instagram creating similar effects, and it's just really cool. So we're going to jump into Photoshop and learn all about this right now. Okay, here we are in Adobe Photoshop, and the whole process begins with really any old stock photo. I got mine from Adobe Stock, but you can look around at some of the free stock websites if you don't do the Adobe Stock thing, but I do have the link to this exact photo down in the description to the video. The first thing that you want to do is try to semi-isolate the subject of the photo. Now, Photoshop has this cool little tool here under Quick Select, and it's called Select Subject right there. We're going to select that, and you're going to see it's going to bring up a pretty decent selection of our subject, and it's good enough. It does not have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. And we're going to go Layer, New Layer, Layer via Copy. Now we'll go ahead, right-click on the layer, and choose to convert it to a smart object. I'm going to rename the layer Subject or Model or whatever you want to call it, and then we'll go Filter, Liquify. And here in the Liquify dialog box, I want to get the Forward Warp tool, which is just kind of the smudgy finger. The size of the brush around 50 for this image is going to work great, but it's all going to depend on the size of your image. High pressure, high density, that's what we want, just something that's big. And then what I'm going to do with this small brush is I'm just going to come in here and begin stretching out his face and just kind of doing a lot of damage, right? I want to try to preserve the hair as much as possible, but I guess at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. We're just going to come through here and just cause this face to streak all the way across to the phone. And I do sort of want this two concave sides to the sort of warping of the face, which you're going to be seeing here in just a little bit, exactly how this whole streaking effect is going to work out for us. But we're laying down the base here for what we're going to be working with, and you can drag some of the hair color into the streaks as well. Something like that's totally cool. Something like this looks nice. I think this will work good for us. All right. There we go. Something like that should work just good for you and good for me. Let's hit OK to commit those changes. There we have it. He's looking all kinds of messed up, but it's just the way we like it. And now what we're going to do is blur this a little bit, and we're going to go Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur right here, because again, we're going to sort of create this concave blur that we're going to use. So what I'll do here, I'm actually going to shut off the preview just so it works a little faster for us. I'm going to drag my bottom arrow point down to there, my top arrow point up here on his hair, and I'm going to grab the middle point, and I'm going to say blur it like this. So we're just creating this concave edge, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. So I'm going to create that end, and I'm just going to click right there on the end anchor point a second time to just sort of complete my path, grab the middle point, and blur that way. Now, real quick, we can preview just so you can see what's going on. We can test it to make sure everything's looking right, but it should be looking just fine as it is. Speed of 50% is perfect. No taper, basic blur, exactly what we want. Hit OK. And now what we're going to do is blur this to just the area that we want it to be. So I'm going to create a new layer group here, and you can just call this blob or whatever you want. Drag the subject into that layer group, and we're going to apply a layer mask to this group because we're actually going to throw a bunch more layers underneath here, and we kind of all want it to be masked to the same area. So with this layer mask, I actually want it to be filled with black, so we're just going to paint in the areas we want. So we can just do something like Image, Adjustments, Invert to just flip the black to white, or the white to black, I should say, on the mask. I'm thinking one step ahead here. Zoom out, and I'm going to grab my brush tool, and here in the brush tool, I'm going to grab just a kind of a soft edge brush, and flow, we probably want to bump the flow up. Opacity at 100 is fine. Foreground color should be white here, and we're going to begin painting in this streakiness, right? So we want it to cover up his face, and the reason I'm using a soft edge brush is because I want to bring it in here, and I want it to run into the edge of his hair. So if your subject's wearing a hat, maybe you could run it into the edge right along their hat, or something like that. Just sort of begin the process of fading it together. We're going to be taking a bunch of steps here to actually pull all this stuff together and really fade it a bit more nicely in a little bit. But for now, we're just trying to get our basic the beginnings of a fade happening here. I'm going to zoom out a little bit because remember, this blur, we really want it to be heading down to the phone. And remember I said I want kind of that concave edge on both sides. I'm going to sort of try to paint that in here. Now, I am using a tablet. If you have a tablet, it's going to be quite useful for you here, and you're going to be glad that you have one. All right, that's nice. We can zoom in here on the phone, and we can just get rid of the blur that kind of overshoots the phone. So I'm just moving around, finding the edge of the phone, just kind of something like that, and then I'll flip my foreground color to white again. Well, actually, I'm going to paint over here to uncover his finger. Now I'm going to paint with white, and I'm just going to come in here and just touch up these edges just like so. And you can make this as clean and straight as you want, or you can make it super organic and rough. We're actually going to be kind of covering this edge up in a little bit, so don't go spending a ton of time right on this one little part. But just make it as good or as bad as you want it to be. So I'm going to do something kind of probably like that. I'll just round off that little corner. Again, doesn't have to be perfect, but I think something like that will work cool for us now. You know what? Actually, I might fade this back a little bit more, kind of something like that. I think that looks a little bit better. Again, we're just going for this big, like it's stretching, almost like you would see bubblegum stretch, where it's going to be big on the phone, big on his face, and it kind of gets, you know, a little thinner there toward the middle. Right? It's just going to thin that out a little bit right in there. Something like that I think is cool. Maybe add a little bit back where it needs to be. And there's going to be a lot of this in this tutorial. There's going to be a lot of this going back and forth where we're playing and really just having some fun with what we're creating here. Something sort of like that. I'm going to bring a little bit of it back. There we go. I think that works. Something like that. And again, we'll adjust it as we go, and you're going to see this mask. We're going to be tweaking it and playing with it all along the way here. Okay, now before we go any further, I want to create a custom brush to begin to get this sort of wiry, fibrous texture that I really want this, you know, his face being sucked into the cell phone. I want it to have a very specific texture, so I'm going to go create a new document here. And this document is going to be just a simple 500 by 500 pixels. The brush is never going to have to be much bigger than that for this project at least. And I'm going to zoom in. And we want to create a new layer. On this new layer is where we're going to make our brush. I'm going to grab my brush tool. We're painting with the color black. I'm going to right click. We want it to be a hard-edged brush and fairly small. And we're just going to dot maybe twice. And I'm going to make the brush a bit smaller and then dot a few times. Maybe something kind of like that. And then make the brush a little smaller even. And we're going to dot a couple more times just to come through and create some interesting texture. Maybe something like that right up there. Great. Now I'm going to shut off the background so we have just our black dots over transparency. I'm going to go Edit. I'm going to choose Define Brush Preset. Here we go. I've got all these dots. And I'm going to just call this, you can call it hair. This is the way I create my hair brushes, hair or dots, whatever. Okay, great. And we can close this document. Don't need to save it. Back into here. And you can see if I paint, well, if I create a new layer and paint, I'm going to have this crazy dot type pattern. Let me get above my mask here. And there we go. And if I paint with this, you can see I'm just creating all these dots. If I paint with white, a bunch of dots. It doesn't look all that good, but we're going to make it look good here. Let's drag the layer back into our blob group. And what I want to do is begin introducing some of the ambient color to our blobbiness. So I'm going to be sampling these colors around the blob and painting them here on this layer. So I'm going to name this layer Lines, and we're going to reach for our brush tool, and we have that brush selected. I'm going to open up my brush panel here because we're going to do just a couple little adjustments. If you do have a tablet, you can go ahead and turn on pen pressure. I'll be honest, for something like this, it can be a little more annoying than it's worth it sometimes. I'm still going to keep it on here, though, because I kind of like it. And then we just want to make the brush a lot smaller. So you can right-click, or you can use your square bracket keys, which I think is what I'm going to do. Just use my square bracket key and just brush this down kind of until I'm getting, you know, lines that are about, you know, that size roughly. Oh, and I forgot one thing. Here in the brush settings, you want to go to brush tip shape and reduce the spacing to 1% or as low as it goes. That's going to give you just nice straight lines, right? Just like that. All right, so now all we have to do is hold down Alt or Option and select, you know, maybe some yellow here, and we just begin painting in some of these yellow lines over here where yellow would be coming in, and then down here we're going to be introducing more of that oranginess, then down here maybe a little bit of that red, right? So you're just going to go over this and just have fun with it, painting as you go. Introduce some of the reddish back here, some of the blues that you should be seeing coming in over here, right? It does not at all have to be perfect. You do sort of want to follow that, again, the idea of those concave lines that I was talking about before. If I just swap to another brush real quick, we want to sort of preserve that type of bend on our blur, right? So you don't want to go, streaking out this way or making your lines go this way or across it like this. You want all of your lines to be making this kind of movement, right? So this kind of movement down, and then when it gets out toward the phone, you're going to sort of be flaring them outward like that, all right? So that's the only thing to think about, and I'm going to go through and just go ahead and paint in some color, add some of this stuff to our little blob. So you can see something like this. We just add all these different lines, have a little bit of fun with it. Let's go ahead and add a curves adjustment here as well, and just see what we can do in terms of bolstering this contrast. So I'm just going to try to reduce the blacks, maybe actually pull the black point up a little bit, and then just brighten the overall bit of stuff. And we're going to adjust just how bright and how dark this is in a little bit. We're going to be using some dodging and burning to kind of level out our tones a little bit. And the colors, you're going to see the colors are all going to kind of get pushed around as well. So don't be too overly concerned about your colors here. Just want to take a quick second to thank you guys for subscribing to the channel. And if you haven't already, make sure you do subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 1 million subscribers. We're going to hit it soon. Every subscription counts. So go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And let's get back to the video. Let's create 2 more curves adjustment layers here, and let's call the top one dodge, and go ahead and flip the mask. So Command or Control I is going to flip it from white to black. Flip the mask of the second one, and we're going to name the second curves layer. Whoop, don't double click on the layer, double click on the name. We're going to call this one burn, and we're going to set the burn layer to the multiply blend mode and the dodge layer to the screen blend mode. We're going to begin with the screen or the dodge blend mode layer. I'm going to grab my brush, and I am going to go ahead and grab just one of the small brushes. I want 0 hardness, maybe make the size just a little bit bigger, and I want to set the flow down to like around 10% and the opacity probably in the 30s. Let's just look and see how this works. Yeah, this is going to be about good. And then just go over the dark areas here, and just slowly but surely, you're just going to work brightness into them, but it's going to be a very, very subtle thing. So something like that is nice, and you can just go through really quickly and touch up any of these areas that really need to be brightened up, and just help level out the tones across your entire blob. Okay, that's not bad. We can go into the burn now and do the same thing, where we're just going to add a little bit of sort of shadow and darkness, kind of where we think it needs to be. Maybe along the front edge and the bottom edge a little bit. Maybe up here along the hairline as well. Just add a little bit. Again, pretty subtle with this. We don't want to go too strong. We're just looking to kind of level things out and prepare them for blending, and also so they look kind of respectable. Now, I am noticing here the edge with this sort of soft blur is kind of looking pretty fake. So we're going to help address that here by going back to our blob mask right here. And we're going to use our newfound, or newly created, I should say, hairbrush. So I'm just going to grab this hairbrush that I've been using. By selecting it from this little strip of brushes, by the way, I should have mentioned, you're going to keep all those properties we assigned to it, right? So it's going to have those shape dynamics. It's going to have that really tight spacing. If you go back and reselect it from your brush selector like this, you're going to get it at its original size with none of the good stuff we've assigned to it for this project. So now I'm going to paint with my foreground color set to black, and I'm just going to go through and begin painting black to just mesh this together. I think I'm going to bump that flow right back up. Probably even move the opacity up to 65, 70%, something like that. And you can see here as we go through and paint with black, we're just giving the edge a little bit more organicness. And I'm going to sort of try to follow the waves of the hair. So you can see how the hair is moving here. We're going to try to go through and follow that a little bit. On the side of the face here, I'm going to sort of go along with the lines, help it to blend into the back side of that jawline a little bit more. So something kind of like that will work for us. And then here on the front side of the hair, right? So we're blending that way. I'm going to flip my color back to white, my foreground color back to white, and I'm going to paint a little bit of that back in. Right, so we're painting the blur or the streakiness back in. I'm going to go back to my foreground color set to black, and now I'm going to really rough up the bottom edge here. And you can see how we're just going through, and we're just, helping to get rid of that blurriness and instead replacing it with what should look like more of these fibrous streaks, which is exactly what we want. It's exactly what we want out of our consumer here. We want him to have this very mechanical feeling connection to the device that he's using. Here we go. I'm just painting away the blurriness here on the top. Doesn't have to be perfect, just kind of has to be good enough. And of course, you can take as much or as little time with this as you like. I'm kind of trying to rush through it a little bit because we're working through the tutorial. I'm going to grab a smaller brush here, and just any obvious areas that are like big outliers like that, you can just get rid of them altogether. Here, like over this bright color, all this stuff that's hanging out here is going to be super noticeable. And by the way, for this, I want a hard edge brush because I don't want to reintroduce that soft edge that I didn't really like that much. So I'm just going to go through, and again, this is where having a tablet can really, really be nice, because you can go through and get a pretty clean edge pretty quickly. And it's not perfect because the opacity was 77%, but it kind of gives it, I don't know, a nice sort of dirty effect, or maybe there's stuff jumping off of this beam of information shooting out of his face to the phone. Now, I am noticing there are a lot of lines down here, and the lines kind of get sparse up here, so I may go back to lines, go back to my brush tool, grab that. See, I don't want to grab the hair dots here. I want to grab the one from right here, and then begin that sample job again, where I'm just grabbing some of these lines and just come into here and try to apply a little bit more of that stuff. Just up here where the color seems a little bit too blurry still. Again, it can be as much or as little as you want. I'll come out here, get some of this light blue. That kind of looks nice. Add some of that. We really want just a nice mixture of the color. Although, like I said, a lot of this color is going to kind of go bye-bye, so don't get too hung up on it too much. And there we have something like that, just to add a little bit more of that texture to what we're doing, and maybe even get some of the light stuff into there to really add to that highlight. Let's probably go more like that. Use that undo button frequently and viciously. There we go, something like that. All right, so we're just creating this. It still looks like a mess. I know. We're going to clean it up here. We're working our way toward what we want and what we need. The next thing we want to do is, again, zoom in on it, and we're not finished with creating the lines. You can see how important this hairbrush is for us. We're going to create another layer in here, and we're going to call this like fiber lines, something like that. And I'm just going to sample right here, this bright, you know, almost perfectly white with a bit of yellow type color. And I'm just going to begin going over the entire illustration here and just paint these lines. I guess you can call this an illustration, right? I'm going to just paint white lines just to really intensify this a bit. Kind of like that. There we have it. It's going to help brighten this thing up. Whoop, that one was going a little bit too crazy. So we still want the lines to follow our basic, you know, that concave idea where we're swooping into the phone. But by doing this, we just create this super organic. It's going to be different every time you create this style artwork kind of vibe where you just have this really multi-layered bunch of goodness. And there we go. Something like that I think will work for us. Just really brightening things up, covering up a lot of that color. We're heading in a good direction here. Now what we need to do is maybe I'll go in, see some of these like twisted edges. I may go in with my erase tool on the fiber lines and just get rid of some of them. Well, that's probably a bad idea. Let's reduce the opacity, see what this looks like. If we just kind of soften some of them up a little bit, maybe something sort of like that. Let's soften our brush here and just paint some of that away. There we have it, something, you know, something like that. Just clean up some of the messy stuff that may end up sticking out in the finished final project. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out, and we need to begin blending this to his hair because it should start to be changing colors, maybe the brownish, peachy, reddish tone of his skin / hair. Really, this should be stretching out of like his hairline. So here's how we're going to do that. Let's close up our blob layer or group for a second, and I'm going to call this color blend, right? And we're going to go with the color blend mode. And here I'm going to grab my brush tool. I'm going to right click because I don't want my hair brush. I want a bigger brush. I want something more, yeah, probably around 100 pixels. And I am going to sample from his hair. So I'm going to go grab one of those colors from his hair. And I'm going to begin by painting here over this top part of our blob or our fiber bunch here. I'm actually going to undo that because it's a little too intense. Let's reduce the opacity down to about 30% maybe. Let's paint over that, and this way we can do multiple passes and make sure it kind of blends a little bit more perfectly. So there we go. Something kind of like that will probably work for us. And you can go over the ear a little bit if you want. You can always go in with the eraser tool and just say, you know what, I actually want to get rid of some of that. I don't like the color there on the ear. And, you know, whatever works for you. But you can see there's before the color blend, there's after. Now we need to kind of mesh it to darken and meet with the hair a little bit more perfectly. So let's create another layer, and we'll call this maybe hairline. And this one we're going to set to the overlay blend mode. I am going to just reset my search options there, which I didn't mean to change. And again, we're going to grab that brush tool. I'm going to zoom in for this. This part's going to be a little touchy. We're going to grab one of the darker colors in the hair. Again, reduce the opacity down a bit, and then we're going to begin painting over this top part of where these fibers are running into his hair. So I'm just going to paint in here and just darken these guys up a little bit. It's going to also infuse them with some color. That's fine. We can always reduce the vibrance or saturation, or both, of the hairline layer. I'm going to just sort of pull it out a little bit. So again, it's kind of coming out from the hair and really meshing up and meeting up with the rest of this blob a little bit more naturally. And as of right now, we have just really heavy lines bouncing right into the hair. How do we soften all this up? And by the way, what are those horizontal lines? Well, those horizontal lines, if we Alt Option click the mask, it's this stuff in here. So we need to play around with the mask more. So this is where we want to take our time, go in, right click, grab your hairbrush again, and we are going to begin painting with black. You can probably increase the opacity to around 40%. And we're just going to begin painting with black and trying to sort of massage this stuff together. Anywhere where you have really extreme bits of white, you just want to really attack those areas even more strongly and begin fading all that stuff together just as best as you're able. I think something like that will work. You could go in and make it a little bit more perfect, clean things up a little bit more. I don't think we're going to take the time to do it right here and right now. But you can see when looking at it from afar, it looks a lot better. Maybe I'll come down here actually and just kind of knock in some of this really bright stuff here. That's just maybe just a touch too bright. You can just kind of soften that off just like so. There we go. Something like that will probably be nice for us. And I'm messing with my brush here accidentally more than anything. Maybe I'll bring this edge out a little bit more. And again, it absolutely does not have to be perfect. I mean, really, it can be as perfect or imperfect as you want it to be. You could have little electronic stragglers hanging off his face if you wanted. Now we'll zoom in. If things look a little bit too dark, of course, you can just reduce the opacity. You can bring it up a little bit more. You can even select this layer and bring up levels, Command or Control L. You can make the color a little bit darker and see if that does something you like. Maybe that's going to help things. Maybe not. Maybe you duplicate it, Command or Control J, and you can see that's super intense. So bring that way back. So bring the opacity up of the second layer just a little bit, just to intensify the whole thing. I think I kind of like that a little bit. And maybe what would come into it is we would end up burning the hair, darkening the hair a little bit more to make it match a little. We're not going to do that right now. But you can see here, we're really just trying to meet his face and have this phone sucking the everything out of him. Let's zoom in here on this again. We're just zooming in and out. Let me shut that off. I'm not sure. Let's save that there. Let's create another layer, and let's call this one New Hair. And we're going to create some new hair and see if that doesn't do a better job at doing exactly what we just tried to do. So with the brush tool, still at 40% opacity, on the new layer, we're just going to sample the color of the hair and just begin painting out hair that is going to sort of run down into the streakiness, if you will. Really all we're doing is we're creating this organic, or attempting to create a more organic transition from this really extreme stuff to his natural hair. So I'll come right through here and just paint this edge, darken things off a little bit, maybe even sample some of that lighter color beard hair and just help him blend all that together a little bit more. Just make it look the way it naturally would look on that part of his face. So there we have something like that. Great. Let's bring in some of the dark colors again, something like so. And this may really work for us. If I zoom out here, we can see if I shut that off, I turn it on, that's really doing a lot in terms of helping clean things up. Now, there are all these weird turned edges. We can do something like grab the eraser tool, just a big eraser tool, soft edge, and just gently paint over all those kind of turned edges. Maybe even reduce the opacity of the eraser tool, paint over those edges again to just kind of help the transition, it a little bit more naturally. So there's before and there's after, and just helps, I think that helps fade the hair together a little bit more than doubling up the hairline does. So I think we'll just delete that secondary hairline. Okay, so it's time to create a shadow beneath this weird thing, and it's probably going to be all lit up, but I think it just helps with the depth to add a fake shadow. We're going to do this, you can do this really any number of ways. Let's just use a curves adjustment layer here and darken things up, right? Just kind of something like that. Make it as extreme and dark as you want. Select the layer mask, Command or Control I, grab your brush tool, right click, grab a nice soft edge brush, maybe like this 90 guy here, and we're going to set the opacity really, really low, and also maybe the flow as well. And we're going to paint with white, and I'll just come in here with the white, and I'm just going to press and hold and paint and paint and paint. Maybe I'll push the opacity up more like 40%. And I'm just going to paint in slowly but surely a shadow here underneath this big blob. I think it's just going to help add some depth to what's going on back there. And maybe, of course, get rid of the shadow here where it would be popping onto his finger because, well, it's just not back on that plane, so we don't want it to have shadow on it. So something like that, that's a super duper subtle thing, but it might just help to add a little bit to our effect here. Let's go ahead now and create the glow from the screen of the phone. So yeah, there's light coming out of it already, but we want to make the glow even more extreme. So I'm going to say glow. Those of you who have watched many of my tutorials before, you're going to know exactly what I'm doing here. We're going to create my favorite way of doing a lens flare at the moment, and that is just a big soft edge brush, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Let's set our foreground color to white, and I'm going to click maybe once, twice, right there, great. And we will duplicate this Command or Control J, and I'm going to hit Command or Control T, and just hold down Alt while you just kind of scroll that or size that back toward the middle. Now, it doesn't really look like we're doing anything, but we have a big glow, and we've got this little baby glow in the middle of it, all right? Now, the big glow, I'm shutting off the baby glow. The big glow, I'm going to hit Command or Control U to open up Hue Saturation, and I'm going to choose Colorize, reduce the brightness a bit, pump that saturation, and let's make this like an orange color, right? Just to kind of match the overall color scheme of what we're going with. You could go with the blue if you wanted, but we're going to add some color in other ways here in a minute, you'll see. We're going to set this to the screen blend mode. I'm going to turn on the top glow, and we're going to set this to the linear dodge add blend mode, but I'm going to double click on the glow layer, and I am going to uncheck transparency shapes layer. And you can see how it gives us just this explosive glowing effect. It's really kind of cool. I'm going to reduce the fill opacity a little bit just to contain it, but I kind of like that really, really extreme effect. I think it's kind of cool. It makes it look like he's holding, you know, just, I don't know what it is, something that he probably shouldn't be holding. It looks like it's probably pretty warm. Now, at this point, you could go and get rid of the color on the back side of the phone or the light on the back side of the phone. So we go like poly lasso, maybe 5 pixels, and we could say, look, let's just get rid of all of this stuff here, maybe even bring it out around this way, and just get rid of that stuff. So we could, what we would do here is we would shift select both of the glow layers and add them to a group by hitting the new group button, and we would call this glow, and then just create a new layer mask while holding down Alt or Option, and it'll fill your selection with black. So we do that, and you can see that looks a little janky, but with maybe with a little bit of like blending here, if we grab the brush tool, and here we just reduce that opacity way down, maybe even reduce the flow a little bit, bring the opacity maybe 15–20%, and then begin painting with this brush tool. Foreground color should be set to white, and then just begin painting over this until it kind of all blends back together a little bit better. So it's multiple strokes, and even on the back of that, on the back of the phone a little bit, just to create a little bit of what you would think would be maybe a shadow there. I mean, if it's as bright as we're making it look, there's probably not going to be much of a shadow, but there's just a subtle kind of shadow there on the back side of the phone, and that's the way we would create something like that. So before the glow, after the glow, looking kind of fire. Okay, so it's time to merge this all to a new layer. We're going to kind of streaky this up a little bit more. So Command-Shift-Option-E, that's Control-Shift-Alt-E, and we're going to call this Smudge. Now, this is totally a you can do it, or you don't have to do it at all, depending on whether or not you like the effect kind of thing here. I'm going to right-click. You can choose, yeah, we can probably go with our little hairbrush again here. And I'm setting the strength to 100 and the ability to sample all layers. And then you would just go through and you can begin streaking all of this effect. So you can see here by just going over this, we're creating, just blending all of the colors and stuff a little bit more, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So you can go over this and do this kind of effect. And maybe you're looking at it and thinking, what are you doing? You're totally destroying the effect. And maybe I am. I don't know. Let's look here. Let's just carry it to completion. Sometimes you gotta really go through it to see what you got. I'll take some of these streaks and push them off the front side of the phone as well. See what that looks like. See, I kind of don't like the look of it shooting through this burst of energy coming out of the phone, but maybe we'll like it. I don't know. Let's just hang with it here for a second. Try to cover up some of the ultra dark stuff. And maybe also to kind of preserve the integrity of some of our snappiest highlights, double click on the smudge layer, and here for underlying layer in the blend if area, let's take the white point, hold down Alt or Option and split it, and just drag that white point back until we're getting some of those highlights back, right? If I turn off preview, you can see we're just getting some of those highlights back. So we're just keeping some of the smudge of some of the middle layers but making sure we bring our highlights back. I don't know. I kind of, all right, well, let's roll with that and see what we get with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? Now let's once again merge all to a new layer, Command Shift E. I'm going to call this raw for camera raw, and just to keep things accessible, well, I'm not going to right click here because you won't be able to see it. I'm going to go layer, smart objects, convert to smart object. And now what we'll do is go filter, camera raw filter. And here in camera raw, we're going to hop first to the camera calibration tab, and I am going to shift my red hue all the way over to -100, and I think I'm going to boost the saturation a little bit, like +10-ish. Then I'm going to boost the green +100, and I'm going to boost the saturation around 30 or so. And then the blue primary, I'm going to shift that about let's go -65 or so. Yeah, that's probably good. And then just boost the saturation of that a little bit, maybe +10, something like that should work. All right, great. You can see we've just totally changed the dynamic of the way our image looks. Don't worry, this isn't going to be our finished effect. This is going to be more like think of it as a treatment layer. Now we're going to try adding a little bit of orange to this, add a little blue to it, what looks better, and we'll add a little bit of orange here. I think about +10, and maybe +10 in the tint department as well. Yeah, let's go maybe around +10. It doesn't have to be exact or perfect. And then clarity, we're going to go a little bit stronger on clarity than we think we need, again, because we are going to be toning this layer back, reducing the opacity, all that good stuff. I don't know that I want to boost the vibrance. I'm afraid it's going to blow out these reds in the hair and the skin and everything like that. We just have this really intense red-pink going on. In fact, what I may do is come over here to HSL adjustments, go saturation, and just try to reduce the magenta and red saturation a little bit. If not, go hue and try to shift some of that stuff more toward the reds. So magenta and the red channel, just slide the red a little more toward orange and magenta a little more toward red. It's really going to make those pinks appear more red. Now we'll come over here to sharpen, and we do have to apply curves a little bit, but we're just bouncing all over the place, having a grand old time. I'm going to hold down Alt-Option, crank the amount way up. I'm going to hold down Option and crank the radius way up as well, just so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to hold down Masking, and I'm going to crank it up all the way until the majority of the white stuff is just over our subject's face and not that much on the background. I'm going to go back here to the tone curve. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can really see my whole image. I'm going to just hit Command or Control-0 if the zooming doesn't quite work the way you want it to. And what I'm going to do here with curves is just reduce the white point a little bit. So I'm going to boost the white point. Maybe I'll flush a little bit of darks back into the main part of my shadow, and then just pull the highlights kind of back to normal, something like that. So you can see this is a very, very extreme edit. But let's hit OK, and we can see there's our change. And now I can just take my opacity and reduce it. I don't know, we'll reduce it to maybe around 50-ish%. So you can see before the edits, it was just very like, I don't know, not as nearly nice, I think. I think this kind of cleans up the colors a little bit, takes away that heavy, sort of like wet grass, grape leafy kind of feeling. And this gives it more of a crisp nightlife type feel. And speaking of the crisp nightlife feel, looking at this, we may see some kind of dull patches in there. You can address stuff like that in a couple different ways. We can add a new layer at any time and just say, fibers more or something like that. And we would go back, grab our brush tool. I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom here. Then I'm going to grab the hairs brush again. Didn't get saved. And I am going to turn on shape dynamics and of course brush tip shape, reduce the spacing. There we go, something like that. And this one, if you noticed, I didn't turn on my brush, the ability for my brush to use pressure. And I'm going to boost the flow back up to 100, but I'll probably keep the opacity around 50 and just come through and just add more of that brightness, kind of like that. You can always make the brush really small as well and just add intensity where you want it. Sample brighter colors even to go in, bump your opacity up to 100% if you like, move through and do that. Maybe I'll just paint straight white onto some areas, right? Just like that, and kind of add a little bit more brightness into areas that you think need more brightness. And by using this really fibrous type of brush, you're never going to end up losing that that texture that we really like here. So we're still going to have good texture kind of hopping out of here and giving us the sort of action that we want. Maybe even make it so stuff is shooting out of the back side of the phone a little bit, or it's sort of spilling over the edges of the phone. So something like that's kind of cool. It's still a little dark and dull in there. It probably really needs a bit of a contrast adjustment, which if I'm being picky, you know what, let's just do it. Let's go to levels. Let's boost the blacks. Let's boost the whites, something kind of crazy. Select the layer mask, Command or Control I to fill it with black. We haven't gotten this far to stop now, have we, ladies and gents? I'm going to grab this brush. Let's reduce the opacity to like 20%. I'm going to paint with white and just come into here and just blow out different areas that need a little bit of blowout action happening. So something kind of like that, I think will kind of do the trick for us. So yeah, there's before the levels, there's after. You can see we just kind of clean that right up, right? So not bad at all. Something kind of like that I think is nice. And let's just finish up the toning real quick. So let's add a curves adjustment layer. Maybe we'll reduce the overall contrast by boosting the black point, reducing the white point. Let's add a color lookup table here. Maybe we'll set it to like the soft light blend mode. Let's go crisp winter maybe. Something like that's kind of cool. I am going to, maybe I'll reduce the opacity of that a little bit. Reduce the opacity of the curves a little bit as well. Something like so. You can see there's before, there's after. We're just kind of pulling this into those blues, magentas, pink type tones. I'm going to add maybe a selective color into here as well. Under colors, go to the blacks. Under the black or on the black slider, reduce it about 5. And also on the blue slider, reduce that about 5. It's going to give us kind of that milky blue feel to our shadows. Again, reduce the opacity a little bit. Just dial it right in. Nice and easy. Nice and soft. And yeah, really at this point, you can go as crazy or not crazy as you want. We can go with like a drop blues here and see what that looks like. That's kind of intense. What if we set that to like the overlay blend mode, which is crazy, but again, we can just tone the opacity back, and that's going to bring a lot of intensity in terms of contrast and light and color. Maybe a bit too much for my taste, if I'm being honest. But you can just have fun with it, play around with it, and that is how you create that face being sucked into a smartphone type effect. This with the bonus sort of energy field that's being created by the phone as well. Well, that's it for this one, folks. If you enjoyed it, check out this other tutorial that's appearing on screen right now. It's a flaming elk photo manipulation. I think you'll like it. You can use that link on the screen. Thank you so much for watching all the way till the end of the video. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.